I'm Paul Lejeau, and with my faculty colleague, Stefan Lowe, we instruct in the program, and you have the two directors of the CFL program for the price of one. With me also is my colleague, Catherine Ho, who's the executive officer within the faculty responsible for all of the postgraduate applications. It's a huge process. So we're very happy to have Catherine here away from her work. And I think maybe slightly off camera, I'm also very pleased to introduce Leslie Cheng, who's a recent graduate from the CFL program. Leslie has a background in law, which is very strong. He was one of our student representatives, a kind of liaison function with the CFL cohort and the faculty, and he's now carrying the burden of training to be a professional by doing the PCLL program here, which is quite hard work. So we're very grateful for him. Leslie has been through not just the program, but clearly the application process. So Stefan, myself, Catherine, and Leslie will be happy to answer any of your questions. What we plan to do is to talk through some important aspects of the program, just to give you a little illustration of what to expect, and then to essentially leave the floor to you. There are a large number of people registered for this session. I'll explain who you are in a few moments. And essentially, our aim in this setting, in the next 90 minutes or so, is to help you prepare for applying to the program, to give you an idea of what to expect in that process, to give you a picture of what it means to come here to study corporate and financial law, and to explain some of the expectations that we have. So that's the basic idea, and your questions form a critical part of that. We're sitting in the Law Faculty's Conference Center. It's quite empty because apart from our technical crew and the four of us, there are something like 60 empty seats. If you are successful in joining us, this will be a setting where you'll become used to lectures and seminars, and particularly public events. Now that the COVID restrictions are essentially finishing, we very much hope to see our usual number of public figures, jurists, academics, people in practice, talking about different topics in law and finance. And that's the kind of setting that you can expect to see. Let me just explain a little bit of who you are. We have something like just over 100 people registered for this session. The majority are currently based in Hong Kong, and they come from a variety of backgrounds. Some are engaged in legal practice, either as in-house counsel with commercial firms or some regulatory agencies or parts of government. Some are in private practice or at the bar. There are people involved in finance, as fund managers, as compliance and regulatory professionals, and people who are more directly engaged in banking, for example. That's the majority, but there are, in addition to that, something like, I think, nearly 20 of you who are current law students, people reaching the end of their undergraduate or JD programs. And you're coming, I believe, from not just Hong Kong, but from mainland China, and several from North America and Europe. If you are dialing in from outside the East Asian time zone, I should say thank you very much for coming and hearing what we have to say, either early in the morning or in some cases late at night. Let me just give you a breakdown of what that involves. Basically, the CFL program is one of only a small number of specialist Master of Laws program at Hong Kong U, which allow entry for people with different kinds of qualifications, both academic and professional. And what that means is that something like between 40 and 50% of people joining in any single year will have some kind of legal background, but not a formal academic training in law. Of those registered today, the numbers with a legal and a non-legal background are balanced pretty much equally. I think there are 53 people without a non-law, with a non-law degree, which can be finance or economics, business studies, quite often accounting, people involved in double degree programs involving finance and accounting or governance. Of the 107 people, something like a ratio of 2 to 1 are part-time, full-time potential applicants, and something like 34% of the part-time applicants will have a law degree. I'm saying that only to say that the program is well established and it's very much accustomed to making an assessment of applicants who don't have a formal legal background. If you have an appropriate professional and academic background, which may be connected or adjacent to law, but you don't have an undergraduate or postgraduate law degree, that's not something which will be a bar to your joining us. Let me just give you a brief picture of what you can expect in terms of overall requirements in the program. The CFL program, in common with all Hong Kong U's Masters of Laws degrees, requires that you take courses which amount to 72 credits. And what that means is that you would take 8 courses. Typically, a full-time studentship, that would mean 4 courses in 2 semesters. For those of you who are part-time students, it means stretching your period of candidature with us to 2 years, typically 4 courses in each of those 2 years. So that kind of picture is one that's shared with all our 7 or 8 postgraduate programs. It's fair to say that the CFL program is one of only a comparative few within all the world's leading law schools, principally common law schools, that offer this kind of scope and content that we do. We project ourselves as being a world-class law school. Hong Kong U is highly ranked amongst Asian, but also amongst all global leading law schools. Within that, the CFL program has a very high reputation in terms of the way that it constructs its syllabus and what it offers to students. And I say that because the scope of study is one that's matched by comparatively few other law schools. So we're thinking of places in Europe, for example, Cambridge, UCL, Edinburgh, the London School of Economics, elsewhere in Europe, places like Zurich and Geneva, Sciences Po in France. In North America, a number of law schools which offer a similar kind of structure. And these are all at the top of the league tables. What we offer is comprehensive. It's taught from the highest standards. And as a result, without wishing to discourage you or put you off, our standards for applications and for enrollment are very high. What we offer is something which is a mix of different kinds of study. There'll be some traditional black letter law subjects, the kind of thing that you would learn in any kind of established setting. There will be a certain number of innovative courses and courses structured in such a way to give you a practical experience, for example, of industry startups, fintech startups, innovative structures in terms of business and professional conduct. We also try to involve students in terms of explaining and discussing the important parts of finance that many people outside finance often criticize, and that's to do with aspects of sustainability and ethical conduct, for example. So a number of things that you won't find easily in other law schools, certainly not in Hong Kong. We talk about the regulation of financial markets, the kind of thing associated with financial crises, for example, things related to not just compliance and these kinds of supervisory issues, but questions of the integrity of banks and non-bank intermediaries, of fund managers, insurance companies, how these things all fit together, both with a study of law and an examination of commercial practice. We also try to stress, if you like, a comparative focus on these topics. In other words, we look at not only law in Hong Kong, but law in other leading common law jurisdictions, and indeed in a regional and international basis. A lot of what we do, for example, involves examining practice in the United States, in New York law, in English and UK law, and how these things affect the way that law in other jurisdictions develop, as well as paying attention to the more sophisticated aspects of mainland law. We've been going, the program has existed since the beginning of the millennium, and it's well established. As I say, we've had hundreds of people coming through the program. It developed in such a way, and the attention being given to finance and corporate governance after the financial crisis was such that we decided about 5 years ago to introduce a sister program devoted to compliance and regulation. And I mention that because certain aspects of the compliance and the CFL programs overlap to some extent in terms of curriculum and in terms of people like Stefan and myself who teach in both programs and who have students who come from both these programs. So there's some degree of shared content. I say that partly because a number of applicants each year will apply not just for the CFL program, but also for the compliance program. And I think even though there is that degree of overlap, it's relatively small in terms of substantive content. And there is a distinction between the nature of the two programs, both in terms of the way that they approach the subject, and also with regard to the extent to which there is a vocational element in terms of compliance and regulation. CFL has a slightly broader compass. We look at a range of other things, and that's something that you should bear in mind in your application. Both programs are valuable, but they're not perfect substitutes, even though there is a degree of commonality. Talking about numbers, the way that we anticipate and plan for enrollment each year is something which is not necessarily fixed. We do have objectives in terms of how many students we accept, but they're mostly geared to really macro issues like how many people can come to the campus, how many people can sit comfortably in our large lecture theatres. We don't have a fixed target in as much as if we have good or outstanding applications, we're always flexible to meet that kind of demand. In the current academic year, so people who began their degree in September 2022, CFL admitted a total of 61, of whom 29 are part-time students. Just to give you an idea, by comparison, the compliance program was 58, so similar kind of size. Different breakdown between part-time and full-time students, again, partly because of the vocational element in the compliance program. If you include those part-time CFL students who are on their second year of study, That means that we have a total cohort, a total enrollment currently of just over 100 in CFL, something like 119 in compliance. And these are quite large programs. They're large by comparison and large in terms of other master's programs at Hong Kong U. I'm going to say a couple of things about the structure of the program, but essentially leave it to you to look in more detail at this. These slides will be posted after the session ends, and you'll have a chance to look at the details of what we include in this kind of thing. First thing to say, for both full-time and part-time students, you can think of the CFL program as having three main alternative focuses. And in a way, Stefan and myself represent, to some extent at least, two of those focuses by virtue of the courses that we instruct within the program. The first is one geared towards finance, different aspects of finance, transactional analysis, legal doctrine, and the practice of finance as it affects international and domestic activity. Everything related to securities law, securities regulation, to fintech, to certain aspects of derivatives, and each of these things within both foundational and very specific elective courses together gives a focus that any enrolled student can take very much towards finance. The second orientation, which is more Stefan's focus than mine, relates to issues on the side of corporate law, corporate governance, everything associated with that. And it can overlap with finance, for example, in terms of things related to shareholder remedies and public listed companies, for example. But it will represent a distinct strand within the same program. The third strand is for those students, whatever their backgrounds, that are looking for a focus on developing financial and governance law in the mainland, how that's influenced by non-mainland jurisdictions, and how it relates to both domestic activity and to cross-border investment and trade. So these three are things that you would have in mind as you plan your courses here, in addition to which we also allow you to take non-CFL subjects. And that can be quite wide-ranging in terms of the application of law or practice or doctrine, things related to statute, to case law. The idea really is that our philosophy is not to project a vocational degree program, but one that involves people expanding their horizons academically, coming in to do a master's degree which allows you to do more than simply a narrow range of subjects. So that kind of thing, you come to an important university like Hong Kong U, and essentially you can take advantage of a great range of things, most of them in the law faculty, some of them in other disciplines. Let's talk about courses. Essentially, we provide something like 35 to 40 core CFL courses each year. And what that means is that even though there's a fairly tight focus, as I've described, there is a good deal of choice available for people with different kinds of interests. Some of that will allow you to reflect your own academic or professional backgrounds. Some of it will allow you to do new things that you haven't necessarily studied before. So there are topical courses, for example. I've put two recent cases here. one involving green finance, which is a developing interest of banks and investors and issuers throughout the world. Another is connected with sovereign debt, borrowing overseas by national governments. And this is something which has become controversial, partly because of the recession caused by COVID, partly because of some very interesting legal developments which are important to judge. So things that are ongoing, legal subjects which don't change very much from year to year, except in terms of their specific content, case law, new legislation, new regulations, for example, as well as new things which might be more exploratory in their content. The way that that works is that you would be asked to take a series of compulsory courses and then the remainder through electives. All of this will be structured in such a way that you understand the choices that you're given when you enroll. These kinds of things are pretty much planned according to need, and both ours and yours. Lastly, just on terms of composition, partly because many of our students are full-time professionals, they come to the campus more often than not in the evenings, few courses at least at weekends. What that means is that the structure of the exam and assessment system is mainly, not completely, but mainly geared towards what we call take-home exams. So some assessment during the course of any single semester, much of it coming late at the end of a semester. And here we are conscious of the need to cater both for people who can spend all their time on campus, full-time students, as well as those who are more constrained. That also means in terms of classes and lectures that we have a majority of classes taking place during weekday evenings, with a number taking place during the day, often geared towards our full-time students. The other thing which we do, which both Stefan and myself are involved in, is having certain streams that are separate for single courses. So, for example, we'll teach the same course to different groups of students, one during the day and the second during the evenings, to give people a little bit more choice and to give maybe a different emphasis to people who are full-time students who might have a more formal legal background, some kind of nuances in that kind of setup. Everything takes place at the Hong Kong U Bulk Fulham Road campus, and almost all our offerings are now face-to-face on the campus. We have a few visiting scholars from overseas who are still using online teaching, and that's probably going to continue for another year or so. One of the advantages of hybrid, COVID-restricted teaching was that we're much more sophisticated now than we were in terms of making online teaching a real experience. It sounds contradictory. But there are cases, for example, where we would want to continue online courses where we have very distinguished visiting instructors, seasoned judges, for example, or academics from very strong backgrounds overseas. That's an opportunity that we will continue to offer. So that's the basic structure, the content, the arrangement of the program. What I'd like to do before we invite your questions is to just walk you through the application process. Some of you will have begun that already. Some of you will be looking for tips for the submissions that you're going to make. And essentially what we're going to try to do is to make you better informed, better geared towards the kind of applications process that we would encourage. It's not easy to get in. It's not easy to get in for several reasons. First of all, because there is a physical limit to the numbers of people that can exist within this campus and this faculty. That's not a hard ceiling, as I said before, but we are clearly limited in terms of needing to distinguish between the very best of applicants and those who clearly would have an appropriate place in the program. In the current, the cycle that ended with enrollment beginning in September, we had something like 317 applications that met our basic qualifications. There were others that didn't make the first hurdle, but that number was the number of applications that the admissions panel reviewed, and that's pretty much standard for recent years. Some of those applications would be joint applications for compliance or for the general Master of Laws program, but on the whole, the 317 were people who wanted to come into the CFL program. Of those 317, we accepted 61. We probably made offers to a larger number, but they may have gone to other programs or decided to go to law schools elsewhere. So the incoming number is something which is, as you see, a relatively select group, as Leslie would testify. There's nothing particularly radical about applying to enter a taught postgraduate program at the Hong Kong U Faculty of Law. In other words, what we ask is a series of elements which you would expect in all respectable law schools. So there are some things which are procedural. We need to see your transcripts. We need to see expected qualifications if you're finishing a degree program, for example. If you're, particularly if you're in practice, whether you have professional qualifications either in law or accounting, maybe in other related areas. We need to see your employment history, including an outline of your internships whilst studying as an undergraduate or a JD student. And we need you to explain why you'd like to join us. We asked for a written statement, and really it's not something which is merely a bureaucratic requirement. We do read all these statements, and I guess the ones that we tend to pay most attention to are the ones that explain why the applicant wishes to be at Hong Kong U and studying in this CFL program. We don't necessarily want to hear your life history. We don't want you to make too much use of the advisory chat rooms and websites that offer guidance to people applying for taught master's programs. Please don't talk about how you have a complete passion for law. Please don't use those kinds of hackneyed expressions. We'd like you to be original. We'd like you to impress us with your objective of being here and explain why. So that's an important thing. It's vital, particularly if you haven't studied in an English language setting before, that you give us a satisfactory language test. And I'm afraid, even though we're coming to the end of COVID restrictions in this context, it means that we're only able to accept certified language tests rather than the kind of thing that you can find through self-testing online. We'll answer questions on all of these points in a moment or so. The final thing that we would like from you is references. And So there's something about talking in a microphone wearing a mask that often makes me sneeze. I apologize if I'm holding my nose. We pay a lot of attention to references because we think they are a good guide that's often quite recent in its provenance, that's often likely to give us more insight about a candidate than we'll find from other sources. At the same time, it's important that the reference be one that addresses your academic prowess, your capacity to undertake a taught master's programs, whether as a full-time or as a part-time student. We know that's difficult for some people to obtain, particularly if they've been away from an academic setting for some time. The kind of guidance that we would give you is to say that whether it's an academic referee, and that's what we would ideally like, or someone who knows your background in a more professional setting, that the questions that they should address relate to your capacity to enter the program. Not how nice you are, how good in conversation you are, what fun you might be as a colleague or as a student, but rather something which is directed very much towards our purpose in evaluating your application. So that's the real thing that we'd like. Both Stefan and I know very well that if good students, past students, alumni of our various programs and courses, if they ask us for a reference, even if we haven't had contact for several years, we will always be willing to go back and take a look at their credentials, because that kind of interplay is often valuable for us as well. We like to keep in touch with past students. We like to know if you're doing something, for example, studying for a master's program somewhere else. So even if you've not had direct contact for a year or two or three or more with those lecturers, faculty members from your law school or college who know or knew you best as undergraduates or as students in general, don't hesitate to go back to them and ask the question, can you please give a reference? Because almost all will respond in a way which is positive. In terms of our expectations, we balance the composition of the program with full and part-time students, those with a law degree, those with substantive professional experience. We look for people who ideally have a capacity to think originally, to make use of this challenge, to expand their intellectual thinking. We really would like people who understand the commitment that's involved in full or part-time postgraduate study. Certainly for people involved in full-time work, it's a very significant commitment. You may think, well, I'm only doing 2 courses a week. I've got a program spread over 2 years. But remember that you'll need to do 2 or 3 times each week the amount of private study in order to make the fullest use of the time you spend on campus. It's a very significant commitment. No social life, no weekends. All of these things suddenly go out of the window for the period of study. And it's something which you need to be committed to fulfill. There's nothing that's more disappointing in a real sense when people begin the program and then find that work commitments make it impossible for them to continue. We have, not every year, but maybe every 2 years or so, good students who impress us with their academic and professional credentials, but who then find themselves unable to devote the amount of time that's necessary for this kind of thing. Partly, if you are in full-time work, you may need to get some kind of recognition, if you will, informal, formal, from your reports, your employers, in order simply to make them aware of what you're doing. Most employers like it when their people engage in this kind of study because it means that they enhance their skills for work. But it would be always to your advantage if you could share what you're doing to some extent, at least at the beginning, with your colleagues and particularly with your direct reports. All of that is pretty standard. The other thing, again, to take advantage of anything else that the university offers outside a formal program. When you come here, what that means is that you can expect certain things of us. You can expect first-class resources, probably the best law library in East Asia, quite a lot of attention given to the way that we manage resources, a lot of quite sophisticated lecture theatres and study rooms. And so we have a number of places now where we teach in what are called innovative spaces, which are designed for different kinds of experiential learning. So not simply you as students sitting making notes in a lecture theatre, but things which involve working in groups, working in teams, producing work, which might have some kind of carry-on into the real world. So we have opportunities, for example, to work with fintech startups, to work with other groups that might share certain interests as yours. Each year, Leslie can give testimony to this, we invite students to become representatives of their cohort and engage in discussions with faculty members and ourselves. And both Stefan and I welcome that kind of engagement and feedback. It's always very useful. And really, as we've had a couple of unusual years because of COVID. The pandemic has restricted people coming to Hong Kong, as you know, and it's made it difficult for us to welcome quite as many outsiders for public events or conferences or seminars. This year, we're gradually getting that back on track. Excuse me. And I very much hope that by September, there'll be a much more normal kind of frequency of these events for you to attend. In a normal year, so go back 2-3 years, I guess, you can expect there to be events of different kinds in the evenings or at lunchtime, conferences and weekdays and weekends, pretty much throughout each semester. So you quite often faced with a choice of different events several days each week. So to come down to the hard core, your next step, if you've not made an application yet, is to meet our deadline of the 28th of February. The books close, the door shuts at noon on that day, noon Hong Kong time. The first point that I would make immediately, because it will, I hope, answer some of your questions and questions which we've both been asked in the last few weeks. We have arranged things so that when you look at our website for applications, it talks about a first and second round of submissions. The key point that I want to make is that there is no difference in the way that these two sets of submissions are treated. You're not disadvantaged in any sense at all by applying for what's called the second round. It's a purely administrative thing. In past years, we've waited until after Chinese New Year to begin the process of reviewing applications. And this year, we thought that we'd try something which accelerated that. And it's an advantage, particularly for full-time students, people completing their undergraduate or JD degrees, because it may be that they can prepare submissions sooner and therefore not have anything conflict with their work towards the final year and the final semester of their degree. On the whole, we get more full-time applications before New Year, more part-time applications after New Year. There is no difference in how you'd be treated, And we don't have quotas, either full-time, part-time, or total enrollment, as I was saying before. So anyone planning to go for the second deadline, you are treated in exactly the same way as those who submitted for the first. And neither the first nor second have an advantage or a disadvantage in that respect. So please make sure your application is complete. Catherine has a huge job to do in assembling and vetting the work that goes into these applications. We know it's not easy, but please put everything together on time, because that means that we'll deal with your application in a timely fashion as well. And Catherine and I won't need to have arguments about what comes next. Please do that. If you're planning to make more than one application this year to the Faculty of Law, tell us why. It's not inconceivable that it's perfectly reasonable, let's say, for people to make an application to more than one program. But it's not ideal from our point of view in terms of the way that we assess applications. We'd like to know what your interests and preferences are. If they are split in a genuine way, tell us why. Explain this in your personal statement. Please don't apply for all of the possible programs. In past years, we've had people apply for 5 different programs, and that kind of makes us think that what you're looking for is entry to Hong Kong U rather than entry to a specific program. And so we kind of think, well, this is not maybe quite so hot an application, regardless of your background. Tell us why. We're perfectly willing to accept applications from people doing this, but it's important that you explain why. As most of you will know, you'll find more details online. We'll respond to your questions, particularly by email. The last thing that we both say, I think, is to wish you good luck. We may not be able to admit all of you, but we very much hope that those of you who are qualified will join us in September and come to this resplendent building. This is taken on a nice day, blue sky. Now it's dark, it's also cold. You can expect a blue sky welcome if you come in September. So thank you for attending. We'll look forward to hearing your questions. Good luck with your application, and I hope what we've said has been of some use in that process. What I would ask, please, if you could post your questions through the Zoom chat function, and Catherine will field those questions and we will both respond. You can direct your questions to myself. The courses I teach are mostly concerned with finance, with financial transactions, with loans, market-related business, these kinds of things. Stefan's background as a quite well-known corporate lawyer is in corporate law and governance, those things connected with that. Leslie has been through this program, so we're all willing to answer, and Catherine will answer any administrative questions that you may have. So please feel free to ask anything, and we'll try to give you a complete response. Thank you very much for attending, and thanks for your time. If you're studying for CPE qualification that you've already got an undergraduate degree, with that proviso, the answer I think is yes, but we would like you to complete that before we can give. It may be that we could waitlist you, for example, and then confirm after you've actually finished that program. Do we have a target age? I think the target age range is between about 20 and about 70, based on based on numbers. I don't know, who's the oldest student that you've had?
The 50s.
50s. I've had one, I think, in the 10 years or so I've been teaching in the program, I think in the early 60s. Certainly, we do get senior people. We have regional heads of fund management, compliance, people who are seasoned professionals who may or may not have a higher degree, coming back to study, and these all people with a very considerable experience. There's no age range. You won't feel, if you're very young, you won't feel out of place because we have lots of young people, recent graduates, for example, people who are graduating from law school this year, and a good deal of middle-ranging and some higher-ranked professionals. So it's nothing in our mind. And to be honest, it's actually very nice to have people with a significant professional background in many of our courses, because it adds to the positive networking effect, the secondary effects of just having a range of views in a class. That's something which is important, I think.
With people from different backgrounds, whether they're recent graduates or whether they've been working in various areas in the corporate and financial field or related fields, we do welcome applicants from all sorts of different backgrounds, and certainly including from non-law backgrounds. And as Paul was mentioning, in the classroom, it's good to have a diversity of backgrounds because that provides a diversity of views in terms of class discussions, and that's very beneficial for everyone. So not only from the lawyer's perspective, from the perspective of black letter law, but we can get perspectives in terms of real scenarios in the business sector, so non-law perspectives as well. So all that is catered for in terms of the different ways of teaching and different ways of assessing. So it's not just strictly the focus on black letter law exams. So we can see that in the teaching and the assessments, and also in terms of the class interactions and the way that it benefits the group. I think it's a good thing to have a diversity of backgrounds.
It's actually very interesting because what Stephen just said made me think of one other thing, which is that we have people as visiting or adjunct members of the faculty who come in to teach certain elective courses, and they bring with them current, ongoing experience of disputes and cases and arbitration and litigation. We have a course involving credit and security law, which is taught by a colleague in practice, and we begin this course this semester. He's involved in a number of cases which are interesting from a practitioner's point of view, but also from a doctrinal and academic point of view, and a commercial viewpoint too. Within the classroom, all of that said in those kinds of contexts, anything that relates to current case studies is confidential. It's given in trust, it's given in a way which is private. And the same thing would apply to case studies or examples taken from students' professional practice as well. It's an important element in what we do, so we value that. No age limits. I have to say, thank you very much for the question. It's the first time I've been asked that question. So, old, young, feel free to come. The reference is important because it helps us to establish how you ranked amongst your cohort in your previous academic studies. That's the ideal thing that we'd like to see. That's the kind of instruction that we give to your nominated referees. Again, I make the point because it's often one that's neglected by applicants, but your past instructors at university or college will typically be pleased to help if they can. You shouldn't feel the fact that you've been away from your undergraduate days for several years. It may be that you think, oh, I can't go back and ask. You probably can. What we're looking for, both from academics as referees and, for example, from those people that know you as acquaintances or employers, professional contacts. What we're looking for is an assessment of some of those subjective conditions that will indicate a valuable applicant to us. So that means things like your capacity for original thinking, how you use your intellect in your professional setting. If you can't produce an academic reference, we're looking for those kinds of insights. How do you approach different projects in your working life? How do you approach aspects of independent study? Are you good at getting on with the job in a way that's original, that's creative? How do you interrelate with your colleagues, with your team members, with clients? Anything that might indicate a strong personality, a degree of cooperation, a willingness to learn, intellectual strength. Those things, those qualities, perfect substitutes for someone who can't get hold of an original, purely academic reference. But again, ask the question first, because it may not be quite as difficult a task as you think. If you take courses in the CFL or indeed in other master's postgraduate programs, will they count as credits towards someone taking a JD program later? The answer is no, but it might help you in terms of the composition of your JD courses. In other words, the JD program here and elsewhere is always quite strongly and rigidly structured, but it may be that you would get a degree of acknowledgement for taking a particular course in the CFL program. It's not really something, though, that happens a great deal. People would know, people would pay attention, but you wouldn't be able to lessen the number of courses that you took as a JD student. And if a JD course is compulsory, it's not something that would be quite possible with a kind of near substitute from the CFL program. Having said that, JD students do take courses that are offered both to masters and JD students. So there is, some kind of harmony in the composition of courses there.
I think you are actually eligible for a student loan. For a 2-year record, it's not of course, like loans from the government for studentships aren't the same as any sort of other loan, but I'm not sure about that. I think you do need to ask, perhaps, to look at the regulations from the UGL and also the people who are giving you that loan. Yeah, I'm not quite sure about that, but there are plenty of people I know who take out student loans for masters, so that's definitely a way to finance your studies.
The question is, how quickly will we respond to your application with offers or conditional offers or indications that you may be waitlisted for a later decision? How quickly after the 28th of February will that happen? Well, given the answer is as soon as possible, for 2 reasons. First of all, we don't want to leave you hanging around. Secondly, we know there is a degree of competition for some of you. Many of you really want to come to Hong Kong U. Some of you are choosing between a law school, for example, in another country or jurisdiction, and that may be something which constrains how quickly you can accept an offer from us. So we would like to be as quick as possible, while at the same time being as diligent and as complete in reviewing your applications as necessary. So essentially, we would expect to turn offers around beginning from several weeks after the 28th of February. They won't all be made on the same day. They will come as a flow, but we'll try to be as quick as possible. In most years, given the number of acceptable applications that we have, we tend to finish that process sometime in April. So that seems like a long time. The one thing I think I would say, and Catherine can correct me if this is wrong, if you are facing another deadline and you haven't heard from us, please let us know. And if it's possible, we will try to give you a real choice by as soon as possible in that schedule. All the communications that come from us in the first instance will be from Catherine and her team through email. The whole purpose of having these two application deadlines, December and February, was to try to speed the process along, not simply for us, but for you as well. So it will be a matter of weeks after February the 28th that you will begin to hear from us, but it won't be overnight, if that's, I hope, a kind way of putting it. Sorry to keep you in suspense for several weeks. This is a really good question. It's a really good question. And it's such a good question that it's really difficult to answer. So I'm going to throw it, let me say something first, and then I'm going to invite Leslie and Stefan to add their thoughts. I was asked this question about 3-4 months ago by someone who was considering applying. And they said, this is my background. Can you tell me exactly what I would gain by studying in this program? And it's somebody involved in asset management, somebody with a strong academic, non-legal background. And the first thing that I thought of was, well, what have we seen from alumni of the program who've had similar experiences? And the views that I've collected in the past 4 or 5 years since I've been running the program essentially are that for people who live with legal processes, for example, if you're involved in scrutinizing documentation or appointing lawyers externally or working with in-house counsel, there is considerable value in being able to talk in a more fluent way about legal concepts, transaction, contract execution, performance, in a way that's informed. You may not be a solicitor or a practitioner, but you'll be able to pose more discerning, targeted questions, both in terms of what your clients are doing and in terms of your own confidence in dealing in those kind of settings. If you're involved in listing company formation or in IPOs, this kind of thing, the process of due diligence is one that is incredibly detailed, granular, and laborious. And we have courses which explain all these aspects of the need for strenuous and competent work. So if you come from a non-legal background and you're hoping to understand more closely what the law is doing, the direction that the law is pushing you in with regard to transactions or compliance or conforming with established financial market practices, this is ideal for you. And even though it's not easily possible to express this in a quantifiable way, whenever we meet past students of the program, and the compliance program as well, when we meet past students, all of them refer back to what people like Stefan and myself have tried to inculcate during our courses, things that they find then come up in their working lives. So I think it's very important. It's very hard to answer the question directly without going into an alumni network. That's something which is important to us. But I think the question is a good one because it does relate very closely to the kind of thing that we have in mind. One of the reasons why we're regarded globally as being a force in this kind of master's setting?
I think we can look at that from different perspectives of the different students. So, for lawyers, the obvious benefit of a degree like ours is that there can be specialisation in particular areas of corporate and financial law. So you'll be able to undertake particular subjects which you wouldn't have had the opportunity to do at undergraduate LLB or at a JD level. And so there are very specific areas which would be relevant in your law career that you can develop some expertise in. And from the perspective of non-lawyers, again, just adding on to what Paul was saying, many in the business world, in the commercial world, work in areas where law is clearly very relevant. And so to be able to do a degree like the Corporate Financial Law, LLM, you'll be able to look at different areas of corporate regulation or privacy law regulation, and to get some familiarity with the laws and regulatory landscape, which is relevant for your work. So I think there are certainly benefits there in terms of your work and career. But even more broadly, I think because the program is not vocation-based, and you get an opportunity not only look at, examine laws and regulations, but wider theories in relation to the various particular topics. I think it would give a very broad-based education in the corporate and financial law area as well. So not strictly just vocational-based benefits, career benefits, but other benefits as well, we think.
Using your phrasing, so improvement that I can observe for myself. I think so. This past summer, I did a few VAC schemes, so basically internships, and I do see that after having done the CFL, you do have a much stronger grasp of the different financial instruments that you might touch in a law firm. So, for example, in LIF1, which is the course that you have to take in CFL, you do learn about the APLMA loan agreements. And all that sort of documentation. So when you go into a law firm, for example, or if you work with lawyers in banks or other financial institutions, then you do get a very firm sort of knowledge, and you get to appreciate the documentation that you have to deal with. And there's also both an academic and also sort of practical benefit that I've received. So I took a mix of academic, so black letter law courses like construction of contracts, and also more practical stuff like securities regulation. And I think it's so I have the benefit of both having the practical knowledge and also increased sort of fundamental learning of the theory behind the regulation, which I think is quite important to know why the regulation was put into place in the first place.
Periodically, postgraduate programs are reviewed by external academics, people from North America, from Europe, from Australia, for example. They come and they check out all the things that we do and offer to students, and they look at the results. And this particular aspect of what we do in the CFL program is one that we've had very distinguished academics comment on as being a strength of what we offer. Stefan's remark about the non-vocational aspect of what we do, I think there's a difference. You can have similar skills in a professional setting, or if you go into a profession after graduating, which allow you to understand what's going on. The kind of thing that we add to that through this mix of scholastic and practical approaches to the subject of financial and corporate law is to explain why. Why is the law as it is? Why did it come about like this? Much of the work that people do in this setting relates to standardized forms of contracts, standardized protocols for conduct, standardized regulations, often within a jurisdiction, often globally. Understanding them at face value is very different and more limited than understanding why these standard practices came about. And that's the kind of thing that we would hope to inculcate in you. So thank you very much. A very good question.
She obtained a law degree in mainland China and then received 2 master degrees in Hong Kong. And whether if the language requirement is a must for her, I can say that if you have to theoretically, you do not need to take any IELTS or TOEFL test because you graduate from a master degree in Hong Kong. But you are required to submit all the documents, including the transcript and the diploma, from both from the universities in Hong Kong, so that we can do the see if you are approved to exempt from the language requirement.
The answer is that we were building this, and then along came COVID. And you know, sadly, networking was the one thing which became impossible, except that everybody was, you know, communicating and dealing with each other online. So in a way, networking became surreptitious, if you will. We are going back to this. It's not something that we've been able to give emphasis to in anything like the degree that we would like. In a normal year, we would have a gathering in early August for people joining the program to help with an orientation and to brief people for course selection. We'd then have a reception, an evening reception for all master's students in early September. And thereafter, there would be, we hope, a certain number of events which encourage networking. But the formality of networking, the formality of networking historically has not been something which law schools have done, for example, to the same extent as business schools. If you're studying for an MBA or an EMBA degree, it's part of the process that you go through to engage with your immediate and future colleagues. And that's something which we're trying to bring about to a more formal extent. So there are lots of networking opportunities, and we are trying to restore the kind of status quo ante that we had back in 2019 for that, and do more with the same thing. So I mean, Leslie, for example, has been a victim of this, I guess because only half of your instruction was face-to-face. It's not anything that we would regard as ideal, but thank goodness we're coming out of that so we can go back to a more normal situation. I should say, by the way, networking has this kind of way. Studying law at undergraduate or taught postgraduate level historically has been an individualistic thing, not associated with any aspect of formal networking. So that's something which maybe we needed to address in a more wholehearted way than we've done before. But there are certainly lots of opportunities that will come up, and we will do anything we can to encourage that to happen more and more. They really are two different things. The person is asking someone as a finance professional with a non-law background who wants to engage further in legal and legal-related work, is if the choice is between enrolling in a JD program and the CFL program, which one is going to work? I think in this context that you should probably see the JD program as something which would lead you to a career change. If you're already a seasoned professional, 3-4 years ago, we had one particular student, a part-time student, somebody involved in finance, in risk management, and they came and did the CFL program, did very well, enjoyed the subject, enjoyed learning law, got a distinction in the CFL program, and then decided that they wanted a career change. engaged in the JD program, did very well in that, then took the PCLL degree and got a training contract at a Wall Street firm. Now that kind of experience, someone, a seasoned finance professional, somebody with a few years experience, deciding to change course, that's quite unusual. And without ruling out any other options, that's the kind of choice that engaging in a JD program would represent. It is really something that would lead you towards being a lawyer in practice at the bar, in an in-house or public sector setting. The CFL program might well be a step on that route, but it's really going to add to your capabilities rather than lead you to qualify to change direction. I think that's the way that I'd put it. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think that's right. So for the JD program, that's really more the pathway to become a lawyer, and in that regard, for students doing a JD, they do cover all the basic areas of law. So basic areas of law, so not only in the corporate and business field, corporate financial field, but other areas, property law, tort law, and so forth. So those are all the basics for an LLB or a JD for students who wish to become a lawyer. Whereas for the CFL program, it's quite different in that regard, where the focus is on specialisation in the corporate and financial field. But in terms of specialisation, there's quite a different, there's quite a variety of different areas to look into, but it is development from this corporate and financial field area, and so in this regard, you wouldn't be looking at all the different building blocks of the basic understanding of law as such. So it's quite a different focus, and so Paul is right to say that for the JD, that's more targeted towards actually becoming a practicing lawyer.
I hope this has been helpful. I very much hope that it's clarified any questions you had about the application process and what we're looking for. Don't see the application as a procedural thing. It's not filling in boxes. We're looking for your insight into your own motivations and skills. And if you come up with that kind of presentation, we'd be delighted to have you. So very much look forward to meeting some of you at least in September. Good luck, and thank you for watching. Good night.